Well, hello once again. I'm Mike Hinkson, your host. Welcome to Unstoppable Mindset. And today we get to interview Michael Coughlin. Who's Michael Coughlin? Well, that's what we're going to find out in the course of the day. But I'm going to start a little bit differently than I have in the past. Let me tell you how I met Michael. He wrote me an email a few months ago and talked about the fact that he read my book, Thunderdog, the story of a blind man's guide dog and the triumph of trust. And we had discussions about that. Michael happens to be a person who is blind. And he talked about his engineering background and other such things, and me being a person with a physics background and also in sales, but also doing a lot of engineering and tech stuff. It just seemed like the thing to do was to have Michael come on to the podcast so we can find out all the scandalous and non-scandalous things that we want to know about him, and just give us a chance to dialogue. And I thought it'd be kind of fun if all of you get to hear it. And that's how we discovered each other. We finally were able to get a time where we could get together and chat. So here we are. And Michael, welcome to Unstoppable Mindset.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Well, we'll really appreciate you being here. Why don't we start by you maybe talking about the younger, early Michael, and tell us a little bit about you, and we'll go from there.
Sure. And as you said, I had emailed you because of reading the book, which was powerful. There were, in addition to my low vision blindness, were a few other parallels that caught my eye, and maybe we'll cover those as we go through this.
Feel free.
I was born in Fort Wayne, Indiana, another Midwesterner. And I was born on a farm, as was my brother. My mother and father were New Yorkers at birth, and in their early years, they moved to Indiana because my father was an engineer working for General Electric, and he was transferred to Fort Wayne. When they arrived in Fort Wayne, they decided to look at the Midwest through different sets of eyes, and they rented a farmhouse on a 40-acre farm. And my father even became a hunter and raised a large garden, and it was something pretty adventurous for a New York kid. But they were loving it, and I grew up for the first 5 years of my life on that farm, exposed to farm animals, farm equipment, and I think at that time I even wanted to be a farmer. But quickly, they moved me into the city because of the school system. My mother had been was a school teacher by trade and had taught in the rural schools, and they felt the city schools would just be stronger. So at 5 years old, we moved into Fort Wayne, and I started school at St. John the Baptist Catholic School and began my early years. In second grade, when they were doing eye screening for students, they immediately picked up on the fact that I couldn't see very well. And it was a bit of a shock to everybody. I was getting by okay, but my parents were told that I had eye problems, and they immediately contacted a friend who was an ophthalmologist who looked at me, sent me to, quote, the best ophthalmologist in the city. It's not touchscreen. Yeah. And I started going to him. He examined me and sent me to the University of Indiana Medical Center, and they all pretty quickly decided that I had macular degeneration as a juvenile.
Wow.
And it was very unusual in those days to come up with a juvenile macular degeneration.
So what year was this?
This would have been about 1953 or 54.
Yeah.
So I was in second grade, and I was obviously starting to have visual difficulties. One of the things I didn't do very well was read aloud because I was having trouble seeing the print. Even though I held it close, I just never could read things out loud. But the school accommodated that well enough. They sat me in the front of the class when the work was going around and each kid was asked to read a paragraph. They just skipped me. Mm-hmm. However, I was able to hold things close, read silently, figure out what was on the page, do my homework, pass my tests, and get reasonably good grades. I was probably an average to a little better than average student. So as I progressed through grammar school, I was just given a little leeway on the reading out loud, and everything else seemed to work fine. As I said, average student, but if I had something to brag about in those years, it was my Boy Scout work. We had a wonderful troop at my school. And in the years that I was a Boy Scout, I earned the rank of Eagle Scout with a bronze palm. I was awarded all 3 steps in the Order of the Arrow. And by 8th grade, was the senior patrol leader for our troop. So I had managed through scouting to excel in something. And then I moved on to high school. At this point, of course, I'd gone all through grammar school. I'd been seeing ophthalmologists. I knew I had macular degeneration, but I had not been given one piece of information regarding assistive technology, such as talking books, large print, learning Braille, or anything else. I can only attribute that to the fact that I kind of saw things. I didn't run into anything because I did have low vision, but I could see. And so they just treated me like everybody else. And I just acted like everybody else as best I could. When I got into high school and I went to Bishop, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
All right. Went to Bishop Lewis High School, a co-institutional Catholic high school where the boys were sort of separated from the girls in most classes, because that's what was done in those days. I really got it. My grades markedly improved. I made high honors or honors at every grade point, every grade session, all the way through high school. I was elected president of the Junior National Honor Society and the Senior National Honor Society. I was in the senior play with one of the lead roles. I was on the yearbook staff. I just participated in everything I could, and the only thing I could not do was drive. And I had a lot of friends, and back then at 16, not only could you could drive with a friend. So I was always able to get rides, and I just went right through high school, still not using anything in the way of assistive technology. But I prospered. And at the end of my senior year, I was awarded the Catholic Leadership Award for the state of Indiana by the Knights of Columbus, and decided that it was time to think about college. So there I was, and I filled out applications. I took the graduate or the SAT test. I took another test in engineering aptitude. I scored reasonably well on the SAT, again, with no help, no large print, no extra time, holding it close, but I got through it. I did pretty well on that engineering aptitude test, applied to 4 colleges in the Midwest, and were accepted to all of them. I think a lot because my high school teachers liked me and gave me good recommendations. But anyway, of the 4 selected, the University of Notre Dame, which was a good school, good Catholic school, had electrical engineering, which was where I had applied to get in, and was ready to head off to college. My senior year, at the end of my senior year in high school, my parents, I was an exchange student in France, where I went there for 7 weeks and lived with a French family. The correspondent French student, Francis, came back to the US for 7 weeks. And right in the middle of that, my father took a job in Philadelphia, and we moved to Philadelphia. So I was transplanted to the East Coast into a big city and had a whole nother set of experiences that were great. I enjoyed it. I explored that city for the 4 years I was in college, even though I went back to Notre Dame. Went to the Jersey Shore and saw what that was about, and went off to college. where they put me on an airplane in Philadelphia. I flew out and began my career at Notre Dame in electrical engineering. Again, doing everything everybody else did. I didn't go out of my way to tell people that I couldn't see very well. I just played the role of a student. And for 4 years, managed to get by with pretty good grades. I had a 3.5 GPA at the end of my 4 years. I had a degree in electrical engineering and was ready to move on again to the next stage in life when the space program collapsed and engineering jobs virtually disappeared. Yeah, so I said, well, maybe grad school would be something one might think about for a little while longer, and started looking into MBA programs, which I don't know, were getting popular. But one of my engineering advisors suggested I might want to stay in engineering because he thought I was a good engineer. I had done well in all my classes, all my labs, working with computers. So I thought about it, and somebody mentioned that there was a kind of a new field opening up called ocean engineering, and that the University of Miami had a program. Well, at the time, my brother was a sophomore at Miami, and it seemed like, wow, wouldn't that be kind of interesting to go down there and maybe room with my brother and whatever. And so I applied in ocean engineering as well as a few MBA programs. I was accepted at Miami. They gave me money to go to school, paid my tuition, gave me a stipend, and so I went off to the University of Miami to attain that graduate degree, which I did in 2 years. In the middle of those 2 years, married my first wife, Judy. She moved down to Florida, and there we were for a couple of years earning a graduate degree in ocean engineering. One of the curricula within ocean engineering is underwater acoustics. And that was very interesting to me because it was pretty mathematical, and double E's love math.
Yeah.
And so I spent my courses in acoustics. And when some job interviews on campus came around, one of the companies looking for people with OE degrees was Electric Boat Division of General Dynamics, because noise and submarines go together, or at least the lack of noise. They want you to be quiet.
Yeah.
So they gave me a job offer, and I took it. And we moved to Connecticut and came up here. And one of the things I did during that first year, besides getting started with my job, was to find an ophthalmologist, because since I didn't see very well and I didn't want it to get too much worse, it was probably a good idea. And I found a fellow, Dr. Coughlin in Mystic, and got an appointment and walked in. And for the first time in my life, I was told I was legally blind. I had no idea what that meant. And I was surprised, because up until that point, I was getting by. I was enjoying what I was doing. I wasn't failing at anything, and life seemed good. But anyway, he gave me a good overview on it. He said, he was pretty disappointed at the fact that I had been involved in everything to that point and never been told I was legally blind, nor had I been told that there was any assistive technologies available to make it easier for me.
So what year was that?
That would have been 1971.
Okay.
He did a few things. He registered me with the state of Connecticut. They actually have people at the state that come out and try to help you with things. They then signed me up for the library for the blind and physically handicapped, the state library. And lo and behold, they provided me with a talking book reader and talking books.
Mm-hmm.
For the first time ever, I was able to listen to books. All the ones I wanted, anything I wanted was there available to me. And it was eye-opening at that point. From that time on, even though the device they had as a player was pretty bulky, I carried that around everywhere I went and was always listening to books. In addition,
Was that records or cassettes?
at that point, they were both. I
Right.
got cassettes and I got records.
Okay.
They gave me a record player. Mostly those were the periodicals on what were then throwaway discs,
Right.
and the cassettes. But I had to carry a second briefcase anywhere I went to bring that recorder because it was a pretty big beast at the time.
Yes, I remember those.
Right.
I think it was a General Electric manufactured machine.
Might have been, but it was great. Believe me, it went from nothing to that. It
was large, but still, yeah.
In addition, through Coughlin, I met another low vision specialist, and what he showed me was a closed circuit TV magnifier. And at that time, that beast was bigger than the tape recorder, believe me.
Oh,
It
yes.
was a full-size black and white television with a separate camera. But all of a sudden, I could see things I couldn't see because they were magnified. And so instantly, on arrival in Connecticut or close to it, I had two pieces of technology that just opened up the world. And it allowed me through that CCTV to get a second master's degree in systems management from University of Southern California. They ran that program on military bases. And they gave it, I went to the submarine base in Groton and took that for 2 years and earned a second master's. I had access to closed circuit television for that. I had my library books or talking books on tape, and I was pretty happy. And my career at General Dynamics was going well. I went from an engineer through senior to specialist and was an engineering supervisor in about 7 years. And anyway, so we were good. But my boss at the time was struggling a bit with his advancement in life. And we had been doing a lot of work, underwater acoustics on submarines with a consulting firm that worked for the Navy called Bolt, Brannick, and Newman, or BBN. Now, BBN was a diverse company because not only were they the leading acoustics company in the world, but they also had some people that were working on something through DARPA called the ARPANET. So here we go. He gets an offer to start a local, then in New London, which is across the river from Groton, a local office of BBN, recruits myself and a couple of other engineers, and I am now a consultant working for the Navy Department. At that point in time, BBN was extremely interested in helping me out, so they provided me with a closed circuit, was actually a portable closed circuit TV magnifier, as well as a desktop version. And a few years later, I Xerox Kurzweil text-to-speech reader. So now I had a little more technology that I could use to get printed books into text format or speech format. And soon thereafter, one of my good friends who I still play golf with, Doug Hanna, came across the fact that a Macintosh computer could magnify the screen and had text-to-speech. And that was from almost the beginning of the Mac. Those features were built into their operating system.
Did you ever get to spend much time up at BBN in Cambridge?
Oh, yes. I spent lots of time at BBN in Cambridge.
Did you ever get to meet a guy up there named Dick Rubenstein?
No, but I'll bet he was in the speech synthesis group.
I don't know that he was there. He and I went to UC Irvine together, and then I actually saw him. I actually saw him at BBN later. We worked on some projects together, but I was just wondering if you had. It was a large place, so
it was large, and for the most part, my work was done with the acoustic side of things. Although as the internet grew, the computer side of BBN, when I started, it was about 50-50, grew huge and dominated the company and all. I mean, they were very early adopters in in speech recognition.
Right.
They had a voice recognition or a voice sort of dialer feature in their phones from years before. They were very much into that sort of thing.
I remember once when I visited BBN, Dick told me about a transducer they had that actually would simulate the sound of a jet engine.
I believe that. Yes.
And
yes.
he said it was like the size of an ashtray, that like a typical floor ashtray in a hotel. But he said you didn't want to be anywhere near it when they fired it up, because it really was just like a jet engine, and it had all the audio capabilities and all the features. So it really sounded like a jet engine. So you didn't want to be anywhere near it when it fired up.
And aircraft acoustics was a huge part of the
right.
acoustic work that was done there, and airport acoustics, and they were just in lots of acoustics. But our little group was in submarine acoustics and kept us busy. Working at BBN was great in that they were a Mac house. Everybody used Macs.
Mm-hmm.
Here I am. They put a Macintosh on my desk. It had the ability to magnify what I wanted to see and do text to speech, even though it's a bit cumbersome in that you had to copy things, paste them, whatever. But boy, I got good at that. I was able to use that computer to do Word. I could do Excel spreadsheets. I could do view graphs. I could do program planning, you name it. All of a sudden, the world of the PC was open to me thanks to the Mac. And my career at BBN spanned 20 years. It was a great place. They were very early adopters in a lot of technology. I was exposed to a lot of it. Early emails. They were one of the first companies to use email. In fact, the fellow that put the @ in the email name worked at BBN, Ray Tomlinson.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the place. But after 20 years, because they were a true consulting firm and fairly expensive rates, and the government was competing on a cost basis. And so eventually I was in a situation where I was looking for a job, and a friend of mine at BBN suggested a fella he knew at Boeing might want to find Mike a job. And that led to a situation where their group, who was doing work in underwater vehicles, were located on the West Coast, wanted somebody on the East Coast who did similar work. And so I was hired as a tech rep, where I would represent the group on the West Coast, but I would interact with their prime customers on the East Coast, one of whom was General Dynamics Electric Boat. And so my location in Groton was great.
Yeah.
So what I thought would be about a 3 or 4 year experiment with Boeing ended up as a 20+ year career with Boeing. And they too were a great employer. They provided me with up-to-date closed circuit TVs. They made sure that my laptop had the best software. It turned out by that time in the PC world, there were things like JAWS and Zoom Text. And so they had Zoom Text on my machine. I was tied into the internet anywhere I went. And I had closed circuit TVs both at their facility in California and at my house. And by that time, you could put the Library of the Blind cassettes into Walkman-sized machines. So it was easy to carry that along on my travels. And for what was more 20+ years, I had a great career with them as a tech rep. I was no longer, now you had mentioned sales. My father and brother are sales people. He was a sales engineer. My brother was a salesman his life, all his career. My case, not so much. Being in Myers-Briggs ISTJ, which stands for introvert a bit, sales was always a pressure job to me. And as a manager by that time at BBN, I've managed a department of 40 engineers and scientists. The whole job was get more work, sales. that was a pressure position for me. When I switched to BBN and I was nothing but an engineer in the field with no sales pressure and work at all times, I loved it. It just lower pay, less pressure, but I prospered. I'm sure I was a huge help to them because every year my contract or the thought of me coming on for another year came up. Different supervisors wanted me, and I just stayed, and I was there for over 20 years. And it was kind of career where I was traveling a lot, and I enjoyed traveling, and I could get by in airports with little monoculars and asking questions and remembering the airport layout so I didn't get lost, and I just got by great. And as that career continued through 20 plus years and I was getting older, the subject of retirement began to crop in. I talked to my supervisor, I'm at an age where retirement is something I might want to think about. Nope. Well, I went from 5-day weeks to 4-day weeks to 3-day weeks, always saying I want to get out now. And finally, they said, well, if you can find a replacement, then we'll talk about it. So I was fortunate and able to find somebody I thought was good at it as today. And so then they put me on as a consultant for another year and a half on 2-day weeks. And finally, I was able to retire.
So what year was that you retired?
Yes. And that's where I am today.
What year did you retire?
2020.
Okay.
During my time at Boeing, which I thought the career itself was fantastic, there were some times, good and bad. My daughter and her husband gave us 2 grandchildren, Chloe and Evan. However, after many, many years, my first wife, Judy, succumbed to cancer. And that was tough. And when you are seeing some of that now, I'm sure. But in any case, after some low points and whatever, I met Karen, my current wife. We went out for a few years and eventually were married, and everything has just turned back around the way it was. I'm happy. I'm retired. Her daughter has given us a grandchild, Esme, who's now 2.5, almost 3, and we are enjoying life.
So how long have you guys been married?
It was just 10 years. We were married in 2012. So
Newlyweds.
Almost, yes.
Well, I'm curious, so you clearly had a rich life. You have the life you enjoyed, but what do you think about the fact that early on they did not, that no one, the ophthalmologists and others, didn't give you any access to assistive technology, didn't give you more access to understanding about blindness and so on. And I don't ask that to say what a horrible thing, but rather just what do you think about it now looking back on it? It's, hindsight's always a wonderful thing.
Looking back, I'm almost angry. At the time, I thought everything was fine. But when you look back, I believe, number one, I think a lot of eye doctors are great if they can help you, but if they can't help you, they tend to push you off to the side. And I think that was a little of it. And it maybe was just the fact that in the early days, even though I had macular and I couldn't see print and everything, I saw well enough to get by. And I'm just thinking they figured, well, he's doing okay, whatever. They should have done way more. And maybe even my parents should have done more. But I even looking back feel that in some sense, the fact that I had to hold things up here to read was almost embarrassing to them. They didn't grasp the concept of a young person not seeing well. They just didn't grasp it. And unfortunately, since we were in the middle of Indiana and there really weren't apparently people with very much knowledge of the subject, it just happened. And I just hope today that way more attention is paid to people, the few juveniles that are limited sight because I'm sure I could have had a fuller experience in life if I at least had been exposed to talking books at a younger age.
Mhm. There are a lot of us who believe that it is so unfortunate that more of us also did not get the opportunity to learn Braille because
Right.
it
Exactly.
becomes the basic means of reading and writing.
I understand. I agree completely. And so here I am having to sit here with my closed circuit TV off to the right with about 40 power magnification in order to be able to see my notes.
Yeah.
I have a fellow in our at the Center of the Blind, Kevin, who is a Braille reader, and he's totally blind, but he has the Braille, and he can sit at a meeting and read what he needs by reading it in Braille. When I'm at those meetings, I can't read anything.
Yeah.
I cannot see any print. I just always have to rely on what I hear or ask questions. So
Of course, in reality, the advantage that we have of being blind people, and if we do read Braille and so on, or not, the advantage is that we can look at meetings from a different perspective, which I love to talk about, which namely is if people are doing meetings truly the right way, they would provide everyone the information in advance of the meeting so that people could read the stuff with the idea then you can prepare and then you go to the meeting and you can discuss it rather than spending half the meeting reading the information.
Yep. Well, they do that, fortunately.
Sometimes.
In the case of the center, I get
Yeah.
all of the information they're going to pass out as Word documents earlier, and I do go through them. So.
Well, what I'm saying is they should really do that for everyone rather than passing out information at the meeting. People should get it in advance so that nobody has to read it at the meeting, rather
Right.
use the meeting to be more efficient. So that's a lesson we could teach them, which a lot of people really haven't caught on to yet.
Understood.
And it does make life a little bit of a challenge. But I'm glad that your work at the center. Well, tell me a little bit about your work at the center and how you got involved and what the center's all about.
All right. Well, it's my second time being involved with the Center of the Blind in New London. The first interaction came about in probably the mid to late 90s when we had a macular degeneration support group in Waterford that was started by a fellow who's a friend, Duncan Smith, since passed, and I ended up as president of the group. And it was a pretty active group for about 10 years. And we brought people in that had macular and tried to provide them with information. And as part of that, the Center of the Blind was one of the participants, and their lead person helped us get speakers. And so there was sort of a 3 to 4 person group as the lead, and the center lead person was one of those. I'd tell you what her name was, but I've forgotten it. It's too many years ago. So when I retired, and I'm trying to think of giving back and doing things, that what can I do? Also, I should have mentioned that not only did I work with the center, I also at one point in time was a reader on the advisory group for the State Library for the Blind and Physically Handicapped, where I did 10 meetings and from a reader point of view, try to help them with their services. And I was on the board of directors for Chris Radio, which is a radio service that reads newspapers and periodicals to people. So I'd done a few of those kinds of things as well. But now I'm retired, I say I want to be able to give back to some degree. And so I thought of the center and gave them a call. I looked up their webpage and there's a phone number. I gave them a call, talked to this executive director, Wendy Lusk, and she said, we'd love to have you come down and talk. So I did. Karen and I went down and we sat and talked to Wendy and Tammy, the assistant, and said, well, what might I be able to do? And after a little discussion, the concept of a support group for macular degeneration came up. And they didn't have such a thing, and they thought that would be a worthwhile project that they should put into their calendar, and that's what we've done. So I every first Wednesday of the month get together with others who are interested in, and the primary focus is learning how to use cell phones, because the new cell phones or smartphones and iPhones and also the others are pretty hard for people who are beginning to lose their sight, and they don't have an understanding of some of the assistive aids that are in the phone. So that's what we do. We spend a couple hours just answering questions and presenting information that I pick up over the web on things their smartphone can do for them. And as that went and started gaining traction, Wendy asked me if I wanted to be on the board. And I said I'd be glad to do that, and was elected to the board a couple months back. So I'm on the board of directors as well as running that support group.
Do you think that, let's deal with the ophthalmological world, do you think that attitudes have changed very much in terms of how eye doctors handle blindness and blind people today over, say, 40 years ago?
Well, a little better. I mean, I have a fellow now, Dr. Parker, I've been seeing for when Coughlin sold his practice, Dr. Parker took it over. I go to see him. He tries to keep me appraised of any new emerging things in the way of eye specialists and what they may be doing for people with low vision. But they're more on the scientific side, and he really doesn't have any of the low vision aids. You have to go to a separate guy for that. And I've gone through those things so many times that I don't know. I would say better, but not great.
Yeah, what I have found in having a significant number of conversations with people is that still all too often, if you go to an ophthalmologist and it's discovered that for whatever reason you're losing eyesight and they can't do anything about it, they consider it a failure and they just walk out, sorry, there's nothing we can do. And that we haven't seen enough of an awareness raising in the eye care world where people recognize that just because you can't see, it's not the end of the world, and you can still be just as productive as you otherwise might have been, except when you use different techniques. And a lot of state rehabilitation agencies are somewhat in the same sort of boat. They don't really ultimately do the things that they could do to better prepare people for having a positive attitude about blindness when they're losing eyesight.
Yeah, I think that's true. Although Connecticut, their agency is called BESB, the Bureau for the Education of the Blind, and they're pretty good. I just actually had a BESB fellow come to my house to give me a how do you use a cane training. I've never used a cane, and as part of our macular support group discussion, one of the fellows in there mentioned the what he called his ID cane. And that was a term I'd never heard of. What do you mean by that? And he said, because he has macular like me, said, I still see well enough to get around, but I'm tired of explaining to people I don't see very well. And so I got a cane, white cane, which you're legally able to use. And he said the one I have is a little shorter because I don't really need it, as do more people with less vision. And it helps people understand that I don't see very well.
And the answer is, and the answer is, even with an ID cane, that works until it doesn't.
Right.
I know a guy who lived in, I think it was Mount Laurel, New Jersey, and would take the train to Philadelphia every day. And he was losing his eyesight, and the New Jersey Commission gave him a cane. But they also continued to emphasize eyesight a lot, and they didn't really convey to him the true importance of learning to use a cane as he's losing his eyesight. So one day he was walking along the side of the New Jersey Transit train to go into the car to find a seat and then go across to Philadelphia. And he turned in where he saw the opening for the car and promptly fell between two cars. And then the train started to move, and they got it stopped and got him out. If he had been using his cane, that would never have happened. And he became an avid cane user after that.
Right. And I completely understand that. And I'm using it more and more, no doubt.
And the problem is that people just all too often think it's a horrible thing. It makes you look weird. Well, there are a lot of things that all sorts of people use that make them look different than other people. That doesn't mean that they're less people.
I had an experience a while back which made the use of the cane even more, it highlighted it a little more. We were going back and forth to the Caribbean for a few years on vacation at a Sandals resort. And we got to the airport in Antigua getting ready to fly home. And since I don't see very well, I always will go up to the attendant at the ticket counter and say, I'm visually disabled, can't see, I really need early boarding because legs, feet, and other things trip me, and I'd like to get into a seat before the crowd arrives. And the first thing she did is looked at me and said, "You're not blind."
You're not blind, yeah.
And I was stunned, but said, "Yes, I am. I cannot see." And they let me. All right. So after that, in airports, I started at least wearing dark glasses. that helped a little bit. With a cane, it's even, at least then you have a claim to your claim. Having to pull out the piece of paper from the state that says I'm legally blind, I have one of those, but that's kind of going a little too far. So I do find it a little bit more helpful.
Well, of course, what you discover the more you use a cane is the better traveler you are, and that helps you get around.
Yes.
Now, as you know, I happen to use a guide dog. In fact, I didn't use either a cane or a guide dog until I was 14. Then I got a guide dog. And I never learned to use a cane until I was 18. But I discovered that I could teach anyone to use a cane in 5 minutes, but teaching people to have the confidence to use a cane takes months, because one is just a technique which you can learn easily. The other is developing an attitude and developing true awareness so that you know where you are and what's around you and how to recover from getting lost and other such things like that along the way. And that's a whole different animal entirely.
Absolutely.
But nevertheless, it's doable. So I still mostly use guide dog, but there are some times that I'll leave the puppy dog at home, or if I'm just stepping out a little bit, I will leave the dog tied down and I'll use a cane, but that doesn't happen very often. And certainly when I travel, Alamo, who is my current guide dog, goes with me wherever we go. So we just returned from a week in Israel doing work and all that, and he did fine. And even on the long airplane flight to and from Israel, he did really well.
Excellent.
But it is a matter of learning to use the skills that we have.
That is true. And in my case, technology has been my savior.
Sure.
The closed circuit TVs, the books on tape, and the fact that computers now have text to speech and magnification. Without those, I would not have had an engineering career, I don't believe.
So what do you use to read books today?
I use my iPad I have the Bard application, which is the current app that's put out by the Library for the Blind and Physically Handicapped, or I think they changed their name recently, but it's the same thing. And so I download books through them, and I use the iPad to read the books to me. I don't have to use a recorder anymore.
Yeah.
It's
well,
and I can do the same thing on my iPhone. So
now, of course, you have the ability to navigate through those books a whole lot more than you used to.
Yes, because again, I'm an Apple person, but on my iPad, I can magnify the screen very easily. So downloading books is a little cumbersome, but not bad. And then I can pick whatever book I want to listen to, and with Bluetooth headphones or AirPods or whatever they call them, and listen to those without bothering anybody else.
Yeah, so, and again, the other neat thing is that you can skip around in a book, which is something that you couldn't do before.
Right.
But now with the advantage of the DAISY format and so on, you can, which is a format, which is kind of an EPUB environment, but you can literally skip around the book by chapter or any number of other levels.
Yep. And not only do I use that app, but I also have downloaded books on Audible occasionally if I can't find where I want it, or iBooks. It's now called something else, and so some of the books you can't get at the library right away. You can go on and pay for them, but most of the time it's through the Library for the Blind. Certainly, that's where I found Thunderdog.
So what do you think overall has been the biggest obstacle you've had to overcome?
If you go back and look, to me, the biggest obstacle was the advent of the PC and getting to use a PC. When I was moving along in my career, and early on, I did a lot of software engineering, but I was back in the earliest days. It was key punches and all of that. I got by. Then as they started using terminals, but simple terminals, I could have the software printed out. I could use a CCTV to see it. I could make changes to the software and have others enter it. Everything was slow back then. But when the PC came along, it became an individual tool that everybody used. You had to be able to use it. And as I said, it was Doug Hanna, my good golfing buddy now, who figured out how to use that with text-to-speech and magnification. And that just opened up the whole world of the personal computer, which is today, I mean, MATLAB and other pieces of software you have to use. It made it available to me. Had I not been able to make that jump into the PC world, I think I would have really been hampered on my ability to continue as an engineer or an engineering manager.
So you're not too bothered by the fact that there was a time that Bill Gates said that 640K is all you'd ever need in the way of memory?
Well, I can go back and remember using a Commodore 64.
Yeah.
And I remember when the very first Macs came out, they only had 2 floppy drives and no hard drives. So
I had my first computer that I really used at all was Xerox Sigma 7. We also had an Osborne for my wife even before that, but the Xerox had 2 8-inch floppies, no hard drive, 64K, and that was it.
Yep.
But
amazing. I mean, the technology has just moved so fast, and the fast moving technology is great, and it's frustrating because a lot of the people that develop, it's because now they can write software that does everything. The concept, and of course you work for a company that's very attuned to that fact, is that much of the stuff they throw out there now is very hard to use if you're visually disabled.
Yeah, if you have visual issues there, the awareness has not grown like it needs to make sure that all that stuff is inclusive.
Absolutely. And it, as fast as the technology is moving, the accessibility features of software to me, are falling further and further behind, even though there's more and more people that seem to work in the field of accessibility. I think they're still not moving fast enough. And it is frustrating. I had mentioned that one of the other obstacles I'd encountered over the years when I was working at Boeing, computer training was becoming the thing. And everybody had to take 7 or 8 computer courses through the year and be qualified in things like don't leave obstacles in jet engines, and called FOD, and foreign object detection, and on and on. And those courses were originally written by the various divisions and by people who got told, make a course. And so they might dig up a course making piece of software or whatever. And when they would finish it and put it out to everybody, many of them wouldn't work with screen readers. And not only weren't they work with screen readers and they didn't read you the text, they'd have little tests you had to pass. And those certainly didn't work with the screen reader. And they were very, very frustrating. And I ran across a fellow at Boeing Corporate who became a friend. And his father had macular, and he was really sensitive to that fact. And between the two of us, we fought tooth and nail to get a standard, a corporate standard for courses put in place that included the fact that you had to be able to access the course with a screen reader. Took about 5 years for that standard to finally be promulgated throughout Boeing. And even when they did, I ran across a fire protection course where it wasn't in place, and I couldn't do the test. And so you have to fight for that stuff. There's no doubt about it.
There are times that you do. You have to draw the line and say, look, you've got to make this inclusive.
That's right. Absolutely. It's getting better. I mean, at least if you stand up and squawk about it, there are people who will listen more than they used to.
Yeah. Well, and I think we're slowly raising awareness, and it's a challenge. Consumer organizations are helping, and we're now getting people to recognize it more, much less that it really is part of the law. The Americans with Disabilities Act really is more comprehensive than people want to sometimes give it credit for, and sometimes we have to fight for it, but it is still happening.
Oh yeah, and sometimes it just happens when you don't think about it. When I was at the Boeing facility in California, and being in California, it's always beautiful, as you know, and so the stairways for buildings are often outside, rather than inside stairways. And we had a nice building and a big wide outside stairway, and they came in and put in a new surface on the top step of the third floor landing so you wouldn't slip. And they just, as they did it, they covered up that yellow stripe that marked the top step. And the next day, I almost stepped right off into and clobbered down a flight of stairs. Got my supervisor and said, "Hey, help with me," and pointed. And she took me right over to the safety people and this was in Huntington Beach. And a day later, they had a yellow stripe on the top of that step.
Of course, the other alternative to that is, which you didn't really have access to at the time, was learning to use a cane better, but that's
right.
Okay.
Yes.
which is another story, of course.
I agree, but at that time, I was not a cane user.
Right. I understand.
I looked for yellow stripes because I could see that much. But anyhow.
Understand. So what do you do for extracurricular activities and such out of work, like sports and so on?
Yeah, I love sports. When I was younger, I could play a few others. Like I never could be a baseball player with a little ball moving real fast, or a tennis player. But I did like to play football because I was big enough to be a blocker and part of that team. And I played basketball because basketball is pretty big. I played that at least through college. But I was very fortunate in that my father, as an engineer, had a medium kind of income, and we belonged to a country club in Fort Wayne. And the golf pro there was a big advocate of teaching young kids how to play golf. So I started learning golf when I was about 8 years old and have always played golf. It got harder when I couldn't see the golf ball very well. I eventually became a member of the U.S. Blind Golfers Association, which I still am a member. They have it was at the time a DVD. Now I think it's an online thing. It's a course for coaches of blind golfers. And they adopted the term coach, but I don't know, helper. It's whatever the sighted person is who's going to help out the blind golfer. And I showed my friends that, and pretty quickly they figured out, well, let's see, we've got to help him line the ball up in the middle of his club face and point out where the hole is. And then there's these new range finders. The one I have talked, so I push a button, it says you're 180 yards. And so between a friend learning how to be a coach and that, I'm still an avid golfer. I play that a couple times a week. And if I have a good round and I play from the senior tees, because I'm definitely senior, I still can once in a while break 80, which is I think a very good score. And then I love to swim. And we had a swim team at that club. And from about age 8 to 15 or something, I was into competitive swimming. And now we have a pool and I swim every day in the summer. So
is Karen a golfer?
No. Yeah, she laughs. We thought about that once, but it didn't go over too well.
You try. Yeah. Now you haven't.
I, of course, also love sports on television where I have a big TV and sit close. My passion, of course, is Notre Dame football. And for the people that see a video, the back screen of my video is a picture I took of the Notre Dame Stadium football field when I was back at my 50th college reunion.
So, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say they improved the stadium immensely since I was there, and there's a big area up at the top where they have banquets and you entertain, and so our class, that was where we had our 50th anniversary dinner, and so we could be looking over the stadium, and I took a picture and put it in my Zoom background. So
they still talk to you. They still talk to you, even though you got some advanced degree work from USC
and Miami.
Well, USC even more than Miami, but yeah.
Well, there was a time Miami and Notre Dame went like that. Now it's not, but USC, of course. And I tell people that, but I have never had bad vibes over the fact I have advanced degrees from those.
See, I love to tell the story that when my wife and I got married, the church didn't fill up until 12 minutes after the wedding was supposed to start. It was supposed to start at 4, and at 4:12, the crowds came in, and only later did we learn that everyone was still sitting out in their cars waiting for the end of the USC Notre Dame game.
Of course.
I want to point out that my wife, of course, is an SC grad. She did her master's work there. And of course, I have to point out that we won, which proves that God was really on our side that day.
Yeah,
just saying.
Sometimes. You know the story of one of the Notre Dame Miami games where they had the dinner or breakfast before the game, and the University of Miami chaplain got up and said that, well, you all know that God doesn't take sides in football, and so we'll both pray and see who the better team wins. And Lou Holtz, then the coach, got up and said, you're completely right. God is not involved, but his mother is.
Good answer.
Yeah, only Lou could do that one. But.
Yeah, only Lou could do that. That's the neat thing about good college football rivalries.
Absolutely.
They're always fun
to
have.
That's kind of my sports passion for television, and golf and swimming are my
I grew up listening to the Dodgers, and of course we were spoiled. We had Vin Scully, who I still think is
Vin, yes,
the best announcer that ever was, and
Absolutely.
Probably will be. And so I learned baseball from him. It was a lot of fun listening to him and learning baseball.
East Coasters, where Karen and I are now I've been converted. She's from Boston, so we're Red Sox fans. So that this weekend they're playing each other.
Well, and then in days gone by in basketball, we had Chick Hearn, and of course Boston had Johnny Most.
Oh yes,
Which
was a big day.
Johnny was certainly a character. Well, I want to thank you for taking the time to do this today. It was fun to do. I'm glad that we got a chance to really chat and do all of this. It was just sort of when I invited you and said we ought to do this. I really appreciate you doing it, but it was fun to take that leap and make it happen. So I'm very grateful that you were able to come, and now that you're retired, that you can just do the things that you want to do and continue to grow and continue to support people who are blind getting more of the services they need.
Yep, I fully intend to do that. And
well, I want to express my appreciation. And for those of you listening, love to hear what you think about our podcast episode today. Please feel free to email me, Michael H.I. at accessibe.com, or go to our podcast page, www.michaelhingson.com/podcast. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Would definitely appreciate a 5-star rating from you wherever you're listening to the podcast. And, Michael, is there a way that people can contact you if they want to talk with you more and just get more of your insights?
Sure. They could email me. My email starts with my initials for Michael Joseph, MJ, and then part of my last name. So it's MJCOUGHL at AOL.com.
An AOL user still, huh?
Still, I have to use Gmail when AOL fails me, but I hang on to that AOL because it goes back a long way.
So do the email address one more time.
MJCOUGHL at AOL.com.
Well, Michael Coughlin, I really appreciate your time, and this was fun. And we have so many similarities. We're roughly the same age, and we've gone through a lot of the same experiences. So it's a lot of fun to be able to reminisce like this and give people, I think, some insights as to the way things were and how we're progressing. So I just want to thank you one more time for being here, and we'll have to try to do it again in the future.
Great. I enjoyed it, and hopefully we can, and we'll try to stay in touch.